by the military-industrial complex.
And now, the Taliban will pay a price.
Do we have the confidence to do in the Middle East what our fathers and grandfathers accomplished in Europe and Asia?
The situation in Afghanistan is deteriorating.
What I do oppose is a dumb war.
All right. Well, hey, everybody. Welcome to a new episode of The Boardwalk. For us, it's been a couple weeks since we had that two-parter come out, and we had a few on the back burner. But we're back, and we are very excited for kind of a special episode today. We're going to be doing an AMA review. So, in case you weren't aware, we had a kind of viral Ask Me Anything on Reddit a couple weeks ago. I think it was more like a month ago, but
yeah, it's like a month now.
Yeah,
we've had a lot better content since then, for sure.
Zach threw it up there after Kyle told us that we should probably put some effort into advertising our podcast. So turned out great. We had a lot of great questions, a lot of great response, and I think a lot of new viewers out of it. So thank you guys so much if you're watching right now. This one's for you. We also got a lot of Reddit karma, which, put that in the bank. And yeah, so
it's pretty crucial in these days of inflation.
Yeah. So look, going back through it, we had over 1,000 comments, and we weren't able to get to every question, and we probably won't be able to get to every question in this episode, but I think some of the main things we wanted to address were a lot of the misconceptions that a lot of people that aren't familiar with the military or the less popular of the two wars America was so recently embroiled in. So that's what we're doing here today. So fellas, how have you been? Looking good.
Yeah, it's been a while since we've sat down here, and because we basically built up a collection of episodes that we could put out over time. So that's always good. I think Zach's still speaking on a delay from Idaho, so that's always good too. Yeah. But yeah, there's a lot of misconceptions in this AMA. That's what we're going to go over today. Well, part of it, and then we can answer some of the funny questions. I actually sorted by controversial to see what horror awaits embedded deep within the AMA, and it's interesting. So yeah,
I didn't know that was
good to be back. Good to be back recording with you guys.
Yeah, pretty excited. We got this, and then we got like 2 more episodes, and then we're gonna take a break, and then come back in the summer with some more fun talking points. But it was nice to just not have to worry about doing any recording after work or before work or anything like that. So. But happy to be back and happy to be doing this specific episode to go over, like Stu said, right? There are a lot of very good questions, and then there are a lot of just like jaded questions, which we'll get into. And I don't think those people are necessarily wrong to be jaded. So, but we'll unravel all that over the next hour.
So yeah, I guess to kick things off, start off with some of the misconceptions. So. The first one early on in the AMA, we had somebody ask like what our main takeaways are from the future from the war and what we'd want the general population to understand. And I grabbed that one. I was saying basically for me one of my main takeaways was that if you want to be successful in this kind of war, you have to be willing to commit enough forces on the ground to win it. And so, we were very successful with drone warfare in Afghanistan and Iraq, and that kind of, branched into, a whole kind of new way of operating for the future for us. But you still have to have enough people on the ground, especially in those rural areas in Afghanistan, to interface with the populace and, win hearts and minds and keep the Taliban from building up, and we ultimately didn't have that. And I'd also like to say that there was a huge response to this. A lot of people kind of took that as, oh, you're saying, we just didn't want to win the war enough, and that's what that's what kept us from it? Or, do you really think that, any number of soldiers on the ground could have won the war? And not, not necessarily, but especially kind of merging with our next topic, which will be CI doctrine, is that if you're going to counter an insurgency, you have to have like a certain ratio to defeat them, which is 10-1. And we didn't have that. We never had that, even with the surges that we did. And but before I go on with that, any thoughts from you guys?
I don't think that we can ever have enough to do the full ratio. Like I don't think that we'll ever get enough soldiers in any war to do any true counterinsurgency 10-1 kind of thing. Without like a draft, I just I don't think we really have the personnel. I mean, most of the military support personnel anyway, like us, pogs or whatever. So I mean, what are we really doing to I mean, force multiply, I guess, but I don't know. Yeah, that's a tough misconception.
Yeah, that's one of those ones where I do think if you are being literal, we have the numbers, right? But you're talking what the active fighting force for the U.S. military is like what 2.6 million or something like that. Like if you count all the branches, it's not a very big number. So in order to have that effective counterinsurgency presence, you're talking a quarter to a third of the entire U.S. military. And the thing is, counterinsurgencies aren't done in a year; they're done in a generation, at best. Two more reasonable. You can't really sustain 700,000 people in Afghanistan for 40 years. You can't afford it, and the voting public won't tolerate it unless you drop that number down to 20,000, supplemented with contractors, and never speak of it again.
But even so, you still have to have the requisite number of fighting men, and that's you're going to be hard pressed for that, especially because you don't really have huge numbers of those in half of the armed services. I mean, Navy and Air Force, we love you, but you're not your job isn't boots on the ground, and so Army and Marines would have to handle that, and it's going to be tough to maintain.
It might be kind of like what Chris was talking about too. We talk about force multiplication with special forces, right? Which what we were doing, but it was going to be a lot of what he was doing, which was recruiting local militias and stuff to fight for us. And I guess you'd have to count those guys in the counterinsurgency ratio as well.
Yeah, and I mean, we saw how ineffective really the ANA were in a lot of areas, so makes it tough. So yeah, we wanted to kind of clear that up, and a lot of the responses to that were it's difficult to give like big encompassing answers when you're trying to respond to dozens of questions that you're getting every minute. So we weren't able to get like a big overall view of it. But just to be clear, we don't think that the answer to win the war was feasible, or that America had the political will to do it. But if perfect kind of perfect world as far as continuing a decades long war goes, that's basically the way you would do it. So yeah, and then we had somebody responding to that message saying that isn't that kind of the same logic behind the Obama surge and the scale up in Vietnam? More boots on the ground and bombs in the air didn't help in Vietnam. So did the Obama surge work? And the answer is no, because it wasn't really like the surge. When people hear surge, because of the way the wars are focused in people's minds, they think of Iraq naturally, and it's not your fault. It's just that's what the media was pushing all the time, and the surge in Iraq was generally pretty successful. It drove Al Qaeda and the Islamic State in Iraq out of the country essentially, and opened up a lot of freedom of movement, and that's because they gave many more boots than the Afghanistan surge gave. I think Afghanistan received something like 40,000 troops, which was less than what General McChrystal was asking for at the time, and also less than he maybe inappropriately went to the went to the press behind the president's back to ask for. And that the big issue with saying, oh well, we gave you enough troops to get the job done and you didn't get the job done, is that we never really did have enough troops to get the job done. We never exceeded, I think, like around 100,000, give or take a few thousand.
And of course, the question, of course, the big misconception. I don't know if we really fully addressed it. Like, was the war winnable at all? That's not really a misconception. That's just a common question we got in the AMA. To answer that question more thoroughly, it depends on how you define winning, and what the objective was. I think the objective changed so many times throughout 20 years that is rebuild a Western positive government, with our own little puppet state. If that was the goal, then we failed. There was really no way we were going to win that from day one. If the answer is to kill Al Qaeda, yeah, we did really good at that. If the answer was to overthrow the Taliban, well, we initially did really well at that, but you saw how that worked out with 20 years of intervention. So I suppose we could have overthrown the Taliban, killed some Al Qaeda operatives, left, and let the Afghan people kind of choose their own government, but we didn't. I guess that would probably been the best course of action looking back, but who knows how that would have gone. So
Yeah, that would have been the best course of action. But we all know that the U.S. government has a track record, right? When we look at just the modern, the way international relations plays in the modern world, right? It's there's no or everything's zero sum. You're either an ally or you're not, right? You're either friendly or you're not, and we're kind of seeing that right now play out in Europe. And I don't think. While I agree that the easiest thing would have been to show up, rain hellfire upon the Taliban and Al Qaeda, which we could have done without a single boot on the ground, and then say, "Hey, don't do it again," and left. I absolutely believe that would have, at minimum, right? It's gonna deter Islamic extremists from trying to conduct attacks on U.S. soil, and that was what we wanted to do. But we didn't do that, right? We went in, and like Chris said, eventually Big Mother Green shows up, and now it becomes this big, drawn out, top down, bloated monster, and that was never going to be winnable. To the point that the Afghanistan papers identified, in 2004, that it wasn't going to be winnable.
Yeah, bureaucracy has has killed 2 wars so far. So we get to join our brothers that went to Vietnam with that one.
how about
tough.
next misconception about opium?
Yeah.
A lot of people want to talk about opium, and that's it certainly was a lucrative trade. I don't know if it really made its way to the United States, but it definitely made its way into Eastern Europe.
Yeah, with opium. So I mean, to kind of lay the groundwork, I mean we sort of covered this in our opium episode, but opium production in Afghanistan was at all-time lows during the Taliban's reign. Near the end of their reign, they had almost completely obliterated the practice from Afghanistan. It wasn't Islamic, and they had moved away from it. Then we come in, soundly defeat them pretty much. 2002 and 3 roll by, and we get into Iraq, and Afghanistan or the Taliban are basically in dire straits. They're trying to rebuild, and they found a great alternative to just relying on Saudi oil money, and that was opium and poppy growth. So they used that. That was a huge portion of their funding for the insurgency for several years, and we were kind of fighting it to some degree. It seemed like as the years went on, we just decided to stop fighting it altogether. Almost, I think, Kyle, you mentioned to somebody that there was the cigar in 20 2017, where we'd only destroyed 1 hectare of of poppy that entire year.
Yeah, poppy eradication efforts were never. That was always a failure. I mean, it just kept growing and growing to untold heights, especially while we were over there. I mean, I think it was probably at its peak 2016, 2017. So I don't know what they're doing about it now. Probably selling more.
Yeah, and I mean, once it took hold, I mean, once we were in the full on swing of trying to fight an insurgency, the last thing you want to do to some poor, subsistence farmer is to say that the one cash crop that he has, he can't grow anymore. And, burning someone's fields is a pretty easy way to turn an entire village into insurgents against you. And so that, I don't know, it was a complex situation, and it probably wasn't easy to deal with for a lot of the decision makers. Or maybe it was something easy that they were able to to turn their backs to and focus on other things, like ignoring advice from their intelligence community.
No, they don't do that.
Never.
I think so. Like, regarding opium and poppy, I remember there was one specific exchange with somebody who, and we had pretty much the same answer everything forever. Every time, excuse me, somebody asked that question, right? Was about opium. We're like, well, very little opium from Afghanistan actually makes its way to America. I think it's something like 1 to 2% or 2 to 4% goes to Canada, and then from there we might get some that trickles into America. But for the most part, it's going to Russia and it's going to other parts of Europe. Um, and they weren't buying it, right? Like, no. I mean, look at the opioid epidemic in America. Again, not created by Afghan opium. That's coming from Central and South America. The only role I could, and we've talked about this, right? I would not be surprised because Russia has a huge heroin problem right now, right? I mean, have you seen Russia? It's massive, and I mean, I would be hooked on heroin too if I lived in Russia. Um, but I could certainly see efforts by certain members of maybe the Culinary Institute to try to, preserve, where poppy is being cultivated in order to push it in and disrupt, uh, social life or civil life in areas where we have, people who aren't necessarily our friends, but fall just short of being our adversaries, right? Like Iran has a pretty big opium problem too. Russia's got a pretty big opium problem. I'm not going to say that it's solely because the CIA is involved. That's always something we toss around because they do like to meddle. Iran obviously being right next to Afghanistan, which is part of that opium smuggling route. They're going to be, determined to have some exposure to heroin. But I do think if we're being as cynical but as rational as we can be at the same time, really the only thing I could see is maybe government agencies trying to ensure that there's a level of poppy being cultivated to disrupt civil life where we have political adversaries.
Yeah, I think the CIA and other groups have already. I mean, they've already proven that they'll use drugs to achieve their ends. That happens all the time, and there's a history of it, even in the United States. Yeah, crack, like the crack cocaine epidemic and all that as well. Um, I mean, it kind of all comes back, to drugs. I'm sure that they're doing that, Zach. I think we actually talked about it in the opium episode, like how it's probably in their best interest to let that flow into countries that are not aligned with us to just disrupt social fabric. So, yeah, and just for listeners, anytime we mention opium, I'm talking about like anything made from opium. So, heroin, opium, pot. I mean, it's all part of the same problem.
Yeah, and just like thinking about it logically, like the logistics problem of trying to transport huge amounts of processed opium and heroin into the United States is just a nightmare compared to especially with those two big oceans surrounding us. It's probably a lot easier to move it in on land through the fairly porous border, as we as we learned in our recent episode with Mick Lopez. It's there's a lot of bureaucracy that's getting in the way of successful border protection as well, and so things will make their way through there a lot easier than off of the coast. Or who knows? Maybe they're shipping it from Russia over to Alaska and taking it down with our Canuck brethren. But generally, as far as like all the facts we can verify, 1% of Afghan poppy makes its way into the U.S., and we're getting all the rest from Mexico.
And if you're curious where we're getting these numbers, it's from the cigar. And I'll throw the link to the cigar in the episode description. Somebody did ask what's a good open source or what's a good form of open source information to just for all things Afghanistan. I mean, the cigar. If you're truly curious about the war in Afghanistan and how and where it all went wrong, you need to read some cigar reports. It's SIGAR. But I think that leads I think to the next.
Zach, real quick. If you want something a little less dry than boring government reports, there's also the Long War Journal, which we also mentioned in the AMA. Those guys were awesome. They were providing open source look into Afghanistan since like 2012, and pretty spot on as far as we could tell when we were analysts. And they'd often be on top of big events happening almost as quickly as we were. So another great source. But go ahead.
What does that say about us? What does that say about us that we're so used to reading dry government doctrine material that we don't see it as dry and boring?
The cigar is it's quite good reading compared to most of the crap that's put out. To be honest, like it's not that dry. I mean, if you're super interested in it, you can read the abstracts and stuff. It's not bad. I've read way worse stuff.
I think we just had more of a vested interest in the source material, so it's more interesting to us.
So I think something else that came up, like when we sorted by best, was there's a misunderstanding of terrorist / insurgent math. Somebody asked, do we think that the American invasion inadvertently created more terrorists than would have been seen otherwise? And I took that one. I said, absolutely, that's a slam dunk. Yes, it did, and specifically after we went into Iraq. And somebody commented, on the one hand, I did say this when people were asking about some positive takeaways, and one of the things we brought up is that our counterterrorism capabilities are quite good. Right, we talk about that war being won in the first couple months, and really, solidly won in the first year, and then we fucked it all up. They said I talk about our counterterrorism capabilities, but on the other hand, we created more terrorists by invading Iraq, and they think that's counterintuitive. So to expand on that, our efforts in Afghanistan were immediately. Obviously a direct response to 9/11. So you have Osama bin Laden, who's the leader of Al Qaeda, and he's preaching the dangers of American, if you want to call it American imperialism, I'm okay with that. Like just trying to project our influence over certain areas of the world, and specifically when it comes to, I guess, international Islamic extremism, especially a group like Al Qaeda. Their concern is that the American government is trying to influence Muslim countries, and their whole thing, like after 9/11 happens, and they take accountability or claim accountability for the action for the attacks. They point out, like, we're doing this because you continue to operate and have a government presence and try to influence Muslim countries, right? And so they were always preaching that America is going to come in. They're going to try to overthrow legitimate Muslim governments, or overthrow at least governments in Muslim countries, and try to install our own puppets, if you will. Well, then what did we do a year and a half after 9/11? We went into Iraq. We overthrew the government, which Saddam Hussein's a terrible person, but he's a Sunni Muslim in a country that is almost completely Muslim. You have a Christian population up north. We overthrow Saddam Hussein, and then we start propping up these people who are friendly towards the U.S. And we try to inject some, people who are going to be more favorable to us and what we want in terms of foreign policy and international relations. So when that happens, all those, I'd say probably moderate Muslims in Iraq who are, people tend to be wary of outsiders as it is. We don't want somebody to come and invade our country and tell us how things are going to be, right? So you have somebody who's just an average everyday Muslim in fucking Baghdad, and the U.S. rolls in, overthrows the government, and now they're going door to door. They're pulling security operations, telling you how it's going to be. That fulfilled the prophecy, if you will, that this is what America is trying to do. And so that created more terrorists and it created more insurgents who signed up to join groups like Al Qaeda, Ansar al Sunna, JRTN, all these different groups in Iraq. And then ultimately more people joined up the war efforts in Afghanistan. So, and I know it's hard to give a very short answer on Reddit. So the long answer is basically that, our adversary preached that we were trying to expand our influence. We tried to expand our influence. The people that were immediately affected fought back, and the common unifying factor is that they were practicing Muslims.
Yeah, and anybody that wants to can actually read the Bin Laden's like letter to the U.S. people or the American people. I don't know if anybody's ever seen that. It's pretty interesting to see. And he basically outlines reasons why the Americans were attacked, what he wants, all this other stuff. It's a pretty interesting read. Especially because, like Zach said, we fulfilled all those things. So we basically fulfill his prophecy and then wonder why you breed more terrorists. And just for listeners out there, terrorist is not the same thing as an insurgent. An insurgent is a member of the populace that wants to fight you because you're there. And a terrorist is somebody that, of course, does certain acts to instill terror in a populace or in people. So that 16-year-old Talib with a rifle shooting at Americans is not a terrorist by definition, unless he, of course, then takes a V-bid and blows it up in the middle of Kabul, at which point he would be a terrorist. But yeah, there's a difference in those two terms.
Yeah. Yeah, and an insurgent is somebody in that country who's upset that you at an invader or the government that they don't agree with. A terrorist is somebody who is willing to cross international borders to fight for an ideology. That another way to break it down. But yeah, so we also had some interesting questions about oil. Relating to Afghanistan, which is weird for us. Again, that stems from the confusion between Afghanistan and Iraq. You can make arguments for oil in Iraq. Obviously we weren't going in there and like physically taking control of their oil fields and just pumping a bunch of free oil for the U.S. I think that might be a genuine assumption of people that are like, oh, well, where's the free oil we got from Iraq if that's what it was for? But as far as Afghanistan goes, I think Zach's said it in recent episodes. They have 10 million barrels of oil in all of Afghanistan. That wouldn't last us, very long at all. So. Afghanistan is very
They
rich.
have about 1.5 million.
So Afghanistan has a lot of rich mineral deposits, mainly lithium and some other precious metals. And we didn't get our hands on those either. Turns out China did, and they bought the rights back in I think 2009, and they're likely going to continue to have them as they work with Afghanistan. Possibly expanding similar to their efforts in Africa.
So yeah, it wasn't about oil. I mean, that really oil has nothing to do with Afghanistan. That's an Iraq theory, and I just don't know enough about it to go into it there. But no oil. Oil wasn't an issue in Afghanistan. Short answer.
Yeah, if you're looking at lucrative ventures in Iraq, I think the military industrial complex was a greater beneficiary than our oil companies over there.
Well, another misconception, of course, is the fact that one of my favorite comments is if the Nuremberg trials were still going on, you guys would be hanged. How does that feel, or whatever? Well, there's a lot of people ahead of me in line to be hanged, most likely. Yeah, I don't know if they'd even make it to me, to be honest with you. There's a lot of hanging to be done for doing war crimes.
Probably not. That was a pretty common theme throughout, where I think there's a lot of people, like when I talk about people who are just jaded, there's a lot of people who are just, so opposed to these wars, and that's fine, right? Uh, we people tend to forget how to think rationally and reasonably, right? And there were people, somebody asked how many people we tortured. Zero. That wasn't my job. That's the humaniters. So we had Max Kabashenko on a couple weeks ago. You might want to ask him, but I'm pretty sure he never tortured anybody either. Those were relatively isolated to a few areas. Because for the most part, like Stu said in the AMA, we have a very professional military, right? There's always going to be outliers. You're going to have your Eddie Gallaghers of the world, your Robert Bales of the world, but for the most part, we have a very professional military, especially when in theater. Um, so no, we didn't torture anybody. There's a lot of people going, well, you're military intelligence. Like that doesn't mean a fucking thing when it comes to access to prisoners. You're in the MI field, you're looking at your counter and your CI guys, your 35 Limas, and then your human intelligence collectors, your 35 mics. Nobody else is going to talk to those detainees from the MI field outside of those two MOSs and then any intel officers. There was a lot of misconceptions about what we do as intel, right? There was my favorite comment was somebody saying, we needed to identify our ranks and everything, which we did. And we included our experiences and stuff like that because they pointed out that, an E3 in the MI field doesn't know shit about what's going on. And I would just like to tell that tanker that the E3s and E4s in the MI field do all of the fucking work. Um, it's like any other military branch, right? Your NCOs and your officers lead, and the junior enlisted tend to do a lot of the grunt work. And in the MI field, the grunt work is stuff we did. It's working with our counterparts, whether they be SIGINT, HUMINT, GEOINT, our ISR collectors, and building products that the general or whoever the commander is that they're asking for, right? Like we have eyes on everything before it goes up the chain because that's part of the job. So that's another misconception. I was very disheartened to see that misconception come from somebody within our military community who just blatantly, I don't know if they were just pissy because they're a tanker and they have shitty, uncomfortable boots, um, or if they're just out of the loop on what we do. Which, being a tanker, who's to say that they know anything about MI? Because I don't know the first thing about tankers, right? But I don't know who drives a tank, or is it called driving, or is it navigating? I don't know. But in the MI field, the junior enlisted do a lot of the fucking work. So we can bury that misconception real quick.
And I'm pretty sure that's the same way in the tank community as well. I'm sure that it's the exact same way. But yeah, I think people have this misconception that intelligence is a lot like James Bond movies, and that Commander Bond is out there doing all sorts of crazy stuff and trying to do whatever. But I mean, the truth is, it's like some like E2, E3, E4, just like analyzing everything. You might have like an E4, E5 going out to collect human intelligence, maybe with an O1 or O2. That's it. I mean, everybody else is just kind of routing or doing paperwork or, making briefings for people higher than them. I mean, it all gets filtered up. It doesn't get filtered down usually. And, except high level decision making, obviously, but intelligence gets filtered up. it gets filtered as it goes up.
Yeah, if you're looking at James Bond, then at least our jobs were closer to Q than James. So
I would argue that military intelligence is closer to Office Space than to James Bond.
very much so. Yeah, we'd never want people to walk away with the with the misconception that we were cool guys in suits doing crazy intel stuff. That's absolutely not the case. Yeah, as far as like working with detainees, I guess on this podcast I probably have the most experience because I was given my first deployment. I was given the bitchwork detail of guarding the prisoners before they get to Bagram Airfield. So we had on Bagram we had a temporary facility where we house guys while they're getting processed and being made ready to move over to the main Bagram prison. So they'd pull like, some E3 to, E5s over, for a shift every couple weeks. And you go in there, you hand your gun over to the actual MPs, which it wasn't their job to guard them for some reason. And you go in for your shift, and you sit down, you pop a movie in, and every 15 minutes, one of the two of you has to go check the prisoner. So you walk over to their door, you open it, you make sure they, aren't doing anything to hurt themselves or anything dangerous. Close the shutter, you check them all, you come back. When it's mealtime or call to prayer, you go over. They have a little piece of paper on the side that gives you like general Pashto or Tajik words for prayer. Like I remember the Tajik word for wash for prayer was wazoo. So you go over to them, you're like wazoo, and you take them over. You give them an area to bathe and pray, and they always wash their feet in the same basin that they wash their faces in the wrong order for some reason. And you do that. So yeah, even that portion of it was pretty boring. But as far as like torture goes, most of that was resolved before any of us even joined. I mean, I think Zach, when you were in basic training, they might have been on like the tail end of that, horrific piece of history, and we were past it. Since then, even the CIA has admitted that torture doesn't work because you're hurting somebody, and they're eventually just going to say whatever they can to try to make you stop instead of revealing the truth to you, and that's makes perfect sense to me. So.
But that doesn't mean we wouldn't turn people over to people that would torture them.
True.
Now, while the CIA
Correct.
might not, but the Afghans, they would, just for fun.
Yeah.
That was
And
a
there are
fun
no
activity
rules
for
in
them.
Poland.
Yeah. I mean, that's definitely, if you were Taliban, you definitely prefer to get turned over to the U.S. rather than the Afghans. I mean, shoot, in some villages that were friendly to the U.S. or where the Taliban had killed somebody that they shouldn't have, the villagers would do pretty terrible things to prisoners as well. But as far as the U.S. goes, as far as we personally, view things, hey, our honor's clean. We were trying to help the Afghans win the war and help our nation, win the war. And ultimately, I think when it comes down to it, the U.S. moved the bar for itself too much to make things successful. That's that's kind of how we landed here.
That brings up a good point, Stu, where we're talking about what the three of us did, right? And to navigate to another thing we noticed was a misunderstanding of maybe the intention of contractors. Because I mean, I'm not going to sit here and say that contractors are saints, right? Nobody goes and becomes a contractor because it doesn't pay well. It does pay well. I will be the first to tell you. I got out of debt by going to Afghanistan and doing that job, but that doesn't negate the fact that when I was there, and when Stu was there, and when Kyle was there, that we were there trying to win a war. And people were pointing out, well, isn't that counterproductive because you'll be out of a job? Well, no, because contracts will always exist, right? Stu picked up a contract after we left Afghanistan, and if Stu wanted to, and I don't believe I'm wrong here, you could be doing that job stateside.
Oh yeah.
Or you could just go to a different conflict zone and keep doing that job, right? There's always going to be avenues and opportunities for us to keep doing our job. People that we've had on this podcast are still doing those jobs stateside, right? So this notion that the contracts will just go away, well, they're not just going to go away. You would just go work somewhere differently. Okay. So yeah, if we had been successful to the point that we were out of a job in Afghanistan, that would have been favorable to what happened on the 15th of August of last year.
Yeah, and I mean when it comes down to it, working as a contractor, your customer is the U.S. military. So, even if you were a contractor that was like, oh, I gotta keep this war going by withholding this piece of intelligence or something like that. military guys that you're working for while you're in theater would probably pick up on that, and they'd have some issues with you.
Yeah. Eliminating information is the job of the generals, not the contractors. Get it right, guys.
Yeah. I mean, me and Zach got fired for doing, a good job and trying to tell the truth. So, when it when it comes down to it, trying to do a bad job probably isn't even an option.
Just got to remember to stick with the narrative, boys. If you guys had just stuck with the narrative that everything was fine, you guys would be fine. Seriously.
Yeah. I mean, I guess you could be a bad contractor in that way, but I don't know. People go in with different ideas. I think the companies that try to pick up the contracts from the government might have ulterior motives, but at the same time, if the product that they're providing, which is us, in this case, isn't working very well, then the government isn't going to keep giving them contracts unless they're big enough and have all the inside tracks to to all the decision makers with the general.
Unless your solution is to try to just saturate the country with people under your contract to try to snake the contract from the other provider. So we talked about that in season 1, but the background for that is that I was on a different contract than Stu and Kyle were on, but we obviously all work together. Well, our companies are probably the 2 biggest companies in the game of intelligence defense contracting. And so they were bidding against each other for the new contract in Afghanistan. And Stu and Kyle's company won that bid. So what our company did was they submitted a rebuttal.
Wait! I was BAE. Were you not? You were BAE, right?
Oh, never mind. Stu and I were on the same contract.
I was
Kyle was wrong.
I was a subcontractor. Kyle was on khaki, apparently.
Yeah, dirty khaki person. So
they're all pretty dirty.
We were on,
I kind of feel dirty thinking about it.
They are. We were on competing contracts, and Stu and me, BAE lost that contract. Khaki won the contract. So BAE rebuts the decision, and then it's like a fucking 18-month long process. And so it just gets to the point where their new solution is to just saturate Afghanistan with contractors under the BAE banner, because then BAE was going to use that as going, look, we have 65% or whatever they were trying to do of the intel support in the country already. We should get the contract, right? When you get to that level, yeah, it's not about trying to win the war. When you get to that level, it's about making money.
Man, really getting into the weeds. This is stuff I haven't had to really delve back into in a couple of years. It's interesting.
People saying you can't.
I might not have enough beer for this.
There's people on there saying you cannot defeat all enemies, which is not true. You can absolutely do that. So
yes, you can.
Yeah.
Yes, you can.
Long as the Fermi paradox keeps ringing true, we haven't run into any that don't bleed yet.
Yeah, there were some people asking us about our thoughts on the withdrawal. And I think there was like 4 or 5 different people that asked this question. And I've got one pulled up, says, do you agree with Biden's withdrawal? I don't think there was any way it could have been done cleaner. And remember how rough the Vietnam pullout was. So I'm going to answer that second part first. It absolutely could have been done cleaner. Excuse me. We have harked on that for a while now. Like, once they had reached an agreement in February of 2020, it's somebody's job somewhere to start building a withdrawal plan, right? And then it's somebody's job somewhere to communicate with the incoming Biden administration what they have so far for the withdrawal plan. Based on what we gathered from the Washington Post FOIA request, they convened on the 15th of August to start building a fucking evacuation plan. On the 15th of August, by the time we all had woken up, Afghanistan was in firm control by the Taliban. So there's an issue. That first part, do I agree with Biden's withdrawal? Let me preface this by saying I cannot stand Donald Trump and did not vote for him, nor did I vote for Joe Biden. But it's not Biden's withdrawal. It is Donald Trump's withdrawal because of his agreement. Joe Biden almost fucked it up by trying to extend it and do the withdrawal on September 11th, because that seems like something a career politician would do, because they think that's good optics to be like, oh, well, we're gonna bookend this on the same day 20 years later. So good job, everybody that voted for either of those two assholes. But no, we agree with the withdrawal in theory and in principle. We have severe concerns with the execution, right? And I think there's too many people, one within our AMA, and then two just in life around us, who are so entrenched in red team versus blue team that they're going to either defend how it went down or criticize how it went down based on the letter in parentheses next to the president's name. And you've got to be a little more objective. That withdrawal was fucked from day one. It was poorly executed. It was not planned at all, apparently. And then it was hastily planned. And we left as Chris Rogers said a couple weeks ago, we left the Afghans holding the bag. Good luck with your new oppressive government. It's a terrible withdrawal. Absolutely terrible.
Yeah. I mean, it would have been basically an unmitigated disaster regardless. But I mean, 13 Americans lost their lives. Like, how can you possibly look at that and think that it couldn't have gone any better? Like, I have 13 reasons why it could have gone a hell of a lot better than it did. That's probably the saddest part.
I can name. Apparently, there's so after we finished our evacuation efforts on the 30th of August, not the 31st of August. After we finished that up, I think the State Department and White House was coming out saying there was like a couple hundred people that still needed to get out. And turns out that number is literally thousands of Americans and Afghans with SIV who meet SIV requirements have since left Afghanistan, not 200 to 500 or whatever the number was that Secretary Blinken was throwing out. It's something along the lines of 5,000 to 8,000. How can you be that far fucking off? And that makes us as the intel community look bad, right? Because that's where we're supposed to be entrusted to do our job. Because somebody did ask that, like, how can you trust the intel community moving forward? It's like, I don't know. I hope you can know that we're coming from a good place, and I can't control who does what with the information once I give it to them. They might say stupid things like there's only 500 Americans left in Afghanistan.
Yeah. I mean,
I say we're even winning. And when you tell them we're not. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think our buddy at the Pentagon, would probably agree that the intel community is trying its best. So, who knows what is getting pulled up into stupid political / bureaucratic crap that mucks up the process. I don't know. The issue is that having been in the intel community for the shared amount of time that we have been in, we've met a lot of good analysts and we've met a lot of really dumb analysts that that probably shouldn't have been in the field to begin with, but they had a clearance for some reason. So I don't know. It varies. It's like any profession. You're going to get good people and you're going to get shitbags. I think everyone can relate to that.
Yeah, and in large part, when it comes to this whole war and the evacuation and it just being fumbled from the jump, Kyle wrote it in here. Somebody asked about the current administration's claims that capitulation of the Afghan government wasn't anticipated so soon, and the general feeling was that the administration was blindsided. And Kyle summed it up very, very succinctly. Generals and colonels tend to change the intelligence or omit it entirely to paint a rosier picture. And that is true. And that is something like when we talked with Chris Rogers a couple weeks ago, I don't understand how any of these individuals can be trusted to lead and how any of them have jobs. And that goes all the way to Secretary Austin and Secretary Blinken, General McKenzie, the CENTCOM commander. Like there's no justification for any of this shit. Kyle sent us a video a couple days ago. I watched it before we hit record, and it's Wesley Clark, former general or retired general, I guess, speaking in 2007 about how the Bush White House had a plan to go into Iraq 10 days after 9/11. And I remember thinking to myself, Why is he talking about it now in 2007? And then I remembered that General Clark was selling a book in 2007. It's almost like there's a reason, like even in that instance, he's withholding information that he says he disagrees with the idea of trying to drum up a cause to go to Iraq. Well, General, why the fuck didn't you do something about it? Like, at some point, somebody somewhere has to be willing to put their career on the line, who is in that position to make a change. Like, not the Stuart Scheller stuff, right? He's a fucking infantry training commander. But like, somebody who is a real decision maker has to be willing to step up and go, this isn't right, and it's time somebody said something about it. And Wesley Clark did not do that until he could cash in on it 6 years after the fact. So this is something that's been going on for literally 20 years.
Yeah. Worst case scenario, if you get released early for trying to tell the truth, you get to release your book all the sooner. That's the worst at that level in in that position. Worst case scenario for you is, slight inconvenience of losing your job early. You already have your 20 years in. You're gonna get your money. So might even be more beneficial for you to release the truth sooner. But yeah, I don't know. It's sad, man. It's a sad state of affairs. And I feel like we're overly negative a lot of the time on this show, but I think we're trying to be realistic about about prospects here. But I don't know. I just don't. I don't see anything like in the in the general pipeline to make me think that good people, or even a small percentage of like good people that are also effective are going to make their way up there and be willing to make the tough decisions that aren't just career motivated.
It's tough to get that far without being career motivated, and the ones that are career motivated are generally selfish, as opposed to not.
Yeah. And yeah, it's fucking it's super frustrating, right? And it's one of those things like there are so many people who are clearly in the know and they're aware that there's an issue. But like you guys pointed out in the AMA, nobody wants to be the general that lost the war, right? And so you just you fucking hide it, right? You tell your intel commanders, your colonels, you tell your ops commanders that nope, you need to give me the good information. What's the good news? How are we doing here? Oh, we lost the district center. Well, the provincial center is what matters now. So as long as we have the provincial center where 10% of the population lives, then we're good to go. And that's how you get a 20-year failed war.
Yeah. Because turning a district red is going to mean that somebody else gets to come in and win the war. On a separate note relating to one of our questions, it was, I don't know, we had a couple of questions relating to girls' education. The Taliban said nope and completely did a 180 on on what they were saying before. They are not letting girls have high school educations, so that'll appease the rural conservative faction.
It's a public 180, but it's a private 0-degree turn.
Would you let your daughters go to a public high school? I mean, come on, man. No, but in reality, that's quite the setback. But I mean, like we have to tell listeners, I mean, a lot of girls weren't getting an education while we were occupying the country anyway. I mean, especially in the rural areas and the more urban areas they were. But as you got further and further out of those provincial centers and district centers, that likelihood became much less.
Yeah,
it's unfortunate.
So there was somebody who I think they're from Australia, and like big shout out by the way to Australia and the UK, because I think most of our questions came from them. Maybe it had to do with the time that we did the AMA. I don't know. But somebody asked about, and they were watching a documentary. It sounds like they were watching Restrepo. I'm not 100% sure, but they were watching.
Oh, that big multi-point question from the guy talking about the cow.
Yeah, the 8-point question. About it was cows or sheep. I'm trying to find it right now. But they're asking about, why, apparently U.S. soldiers or U.S. personnel like killed their livestock, and why is some like army lieutenant in the middle of a valley on the valley floor and trying to negotiate, dealing with negotiations from an Afghan family trying to seek compensation for their dead livestock. And you know what? Okay, here it is. That is a great fucking question. It's here it is. It says Restrepo. What are the U.S. military personnel doing negotiating compensation for dead cows? That's not their job. So that's a great observation. Like Kyle pointed out, like it's not our job to do that. We go and we kill people. Well, not the three of us, but other people kill people. What civilian decided that the U.S. military personnel is best placed to negotiate dead cow compensation? That would be the general running the war. It's like, I don't live in the USA, something. Here's what's called accountable government, where members of parliament are accountable for members of the executive. I presume you have something similar. So for the cow example, who's accountable for deciding that one function of the U.S. military in Afghanistan is negotiating over the price of dead cows? Listen, this became like a fucking rabbit's hole of like just really concern for this dead cow. But like the first couple of questions are great questions. Beyond that, this is what happens when you get Big Mother Green involved. You get it's this big bloated presence, and you've got lieutenants on valley floors trying to negotiate dead cow reparations, and that's not what they're there for. So that's pretty much it.
Yeah, a little bit to him. Wasn't your responsible government also putting people in like camps during COVID or something? I don't know. That bit got bloated when it got to our media. I don't know, but a little bit. But as far as Australians go, they were some of the best. I only really interacted with like mainly with the English and the Australian soldiers that were out there with us, and they were all stand up dudes and really really good to hang out with. And I love your fucking accents. It's awesome talking to you.
I did want to real quick point out, I pulled up FM 3-24, which is U.S. Army Counterinsurgency Doctrine, because, it's kind of important if we're talking about counterinsurgency. And the text, Chapter 1, Section 67. During previous conflicts, planners assumed that combatants required a 10 or 15 to 1 advantage over insurgents to win. However, no predetermined fixed ratio of friendly troops to enemy combatants ensures success in COIN. The conditions of operational environment and the approaches insurgents use vary too widely. A better force requirement gauge of troop density is the ratio of security forces, including host nation, military, and police forces, to inhabitants, is 20 to 25 counterinsurgents for every 1,000 residents in an AO. So let me do some quick, real math. 43 million people divided by 1,000 equals 43,000 times 20 equals 860,000. So at minimum, you needed 860,000 pairs of boots on the ground. So that's even higher than the conservative 500 to 700,000. Since they asked about, they also asked about troop levels. So I wanted to pull that up real quick. And that's straight out of the doctrine. That's Army policy.
Yeah, how big was the ANDSF back in the day?
It wasn't that big.
Nope.
Maybe 100,000, maybe.
Yeah, I'd say probably like 100,000.
200, maybe.
Yeah.
I like the first question was our thoughts on Chicago style pizza or deep dish pizza.
Yeah,
And,
thank you for that.
I will again reiterate. Yeah, deep dish pizza is fucking soup in a bread basket or in a bread bowl, and should never be consumed unless you are starving on a desert island somewhere. In which case, if you have the resources to make deep dish pizza, you should make something else.
I do not believe that strong. I mean, you can say it's like not real pizza if you want, but I don't know. Have you ever had soup in a bread bowl? I mean, that's pretty good. On top of that, Chicago style pizza is nice every once in a while.
It's never going to be.
I don't
just
understand
a
your
New
stronger
York
version.
style or a thin crust. Never. It'll
Yeah,
never be.
But
I agree.
if you're in Chicago and you're like, are you not going to eat one of the staples of their fucking culinary palette there?
I mean, I'll try it there, I guess. I mean, I'm having a hard time believing that any deep dish I've ever had would beat any standard or thin crust pizza I've ever had.
Well, yeah. See, that's reasonable.
Yeah.
Zach's
So
saying
here's
he would rather starve than eat deep dish pizza, and that's
I did not say that.
you just said desert island.
I said that if I was on a and then I said I would eat it if I were on a desert island.
Oh.
But if I had the resources to make a deep dish pizza, I could probably make other things instead.
I think it's fine every
It's
now and
pizza,
then.
right?
Yeah.
Pizza's pizza.
But with the resources to make a
so-
deep dish,
so
you
here's
could make
something
a
that-
standard thin crust pizza. It's the same materials.
Exactly. So here's one that somebody threw up that I that was really unique, and I kind of wish we had answered it maybe a little more thoroughly. But they said it's my belief that the U.S. needed to treat Afghanistan like South Korea, and stay there for as long as it took for the Taliban to essentially not exist anymore, whether it be 50, 100 years, or however long. What are your opinions on that? And I said we're not signing up for that plan, and they asked why not. So I never answered that, right? So to answer that, one, we are still in Korea, and last I checked, North Korea still exists. So what the fuck was the point? Like, once the Korean War was over, even though it's not officially over on the Korean Peninsula, not a whole lot of land really changed hands, right? There's still an adversary on the other side of the DMZ. So whether we're there for 50 years, 100 years, or whatever, North and South Korea are going to be the way they are. But furthermore, nobody in America is going to commit their sons and daughters for 100 years to try to defeat the Taliban. Because if you do that to defeat the Taliban, because the Taliban are, I think, objectively awful human beings, then you've got to go to Sudan and do it, and you've got to go to Chad and do it, and you've got to go to Nigeria and do it, and you have to go to all these places that are governed by awful people. And you have to remove them from power as well because of I'm not going to say that it's subjective, because I think, like I said, the Taliban are objectively terrible, right? But at what point do you slip into the world of subjectivity and go, well, you know what? I think Lithuania needs some regime change. You can't do it. So no, I'm not signing up for that plan because we're not the world's police.
I mean, that's fair. And also, it's like we talk about imperialism. People want to talk about imperialism. That's the hot topic lately in politically correct society. And doing that's pure imperialism. At a certain point, if you believe the Taliban are objectively terrible people or not, they are the current government. They earned it by their own actions, and they're in control of the country now. So the Afghan people have a right to exist, and however they choose to do it, or whatever government they choose to follow, is going to be up to them, not up to the United States of America, and never should have been, really. For the record, I don't think the Taliban are objectively terrible people. I think some of their leaders are objectively terrible. I think I kind of get why you would subscribe.
Yeah, let me
to the
rephrase
ideology.
that. I do want to clarify that. I completely agree with you, and we've talked about that, right? If you're a poor, destitute subsistence farmer, you've got you can join the ANDSF in 2007 and try to fight the Taliban, or you can join the guys who are providing some sort of governance, who have a court system, who are helping out the local population, which happen to be the Taliban. This is one of those. This is like that, Russian government, not Russia thing, right? But for Afghanistan, like the Afghan people, by and large, just want to go about their day-to-day lives. It's the Afghan government, which is the Taliban, like Taliban political figures, that is the problem. And you see that with them doing things like going, we're not gonna let girls go to school. It's like, no shit, you never were going to. You said that 4 months ago to get the international community off of your back.
All right. Well, we're at the hour 6-minute mark. I think we've touched on a lot of the questions on the AMA, and I don't know. We rely on viewers to really help us here. So if you guys have any questions, concerns, or any topics you want addressed or brought up, anything you want to hear our opinions on, which are probably at times informed, at times completely uninformed, and just speaking as a true American with an opinion on everything, just let us know on our social media.
That's right.
Do you guys have anything else to add?
First Amendment, baby.
The AMA was a very surprising success for us. Maybe we'll do another one at some point. I think that'd be cool. I don't see an immediate need for it, but it was a nice boost in our numbers. So that was really neat. It was cool to see people taking an interest in this topic. But yeah, thank you guys so much for stopping by the AMA, and if you continue on with us, we'll hope to keep putting out some good content for you.
Yeah. I want to echo the same sentiments, right? I certainly appreciate the people that hopped on there. I want to clarify, right? We did the AMA because we wanted more listeners, right? But we don't make any money off of this. There are a lot of people saying that we were trying to capitalize off of the demise of the Afghan people and the Afghan government. Just full disclosure, we use Riverside to record, and we use Buzzsprout to host our podcast when we upload episodes. And that cost us $396 a year. So the amount of money we're making is negative $396 a year. We're doing this because we want to get the information out, right? That's what it's about. It's not us trying to quit our fucking day jobs and be the next Joe Rogan, even though we joke about it from time to time. We got bored I got bored one day. I asked Stu and Kyle if they wanted to do a podcast, and then we fucking started doing it, and we're having fun, and it's a great cathartic experience. And it's made possible because of the people that, hopped on the AMA and asked us questions and helped create more content for us to look into and give answers. So I'm really thankful and grateful for the people that joined in on that. I wanted to address the cynics from there who are like, oh, you're just doing it for money. No, we're not. We're doing it because an educated society needs to understand these things, because last I checked, most of our listeners vote, and you need to be informed when you decide who to cast a vote for. And this is a part of that process.
It's cheaper than therapy.
Yes, it is.